The universal theory explained. There is a problem man does not wish to confront. Yet, everyone makes a show of noticing the obvious. We are in a failed system, we always have been. Only the most naive think the system is fixable. We have tinkered with it for 6,000 years. Many disagreements were settled, insofar as disagreements on this planet can be considered settled, by wars. Many others were settled by deadly force of some kind. Often the victim did not even know there was a problem, nor have any means to fix it. We have never found what is wrong with this planet, never mind finding a way to fix it. But if we understood the system we are in, our inability to fix our problems ought to come as no surprise. The tendency for our social conditions to get progressively worse, also ought to be expected. Our technology improves, but our relationships seem to deteriorate. This ought to come as no surprise, but if it was not a surprise, we probably would not be in the situation we are in. This system we are in manifests the law of the jungle. Nature prioritizes force, might makes right and the end justifies the means. No matter how powerful you are, there will always be challengers. There will always be wars and personal conflict, because the way to advance up the social ladder is through winning battles. Nations war against nations, groups against other groups or gangs, and individuals struggle to gain an advantage over other individuals. Obviously, nature nor the methods of nature cannot eliminate social problems. No matter how one person or group dominates the competition, there is always a contender waiting in the wings. However, there is one factor in abundance that eliminates all social problems. It is inversely related to another factor that, as it increases in power, destroys progress and peace. These two factors are inversely related and explain the problems we are in. The world is not one world, it is an analytical construct created from a binary choice. Reality is not one thing but two incompatible frames of reference. Reality is a world in which two opposite and incompatible factors divided by an infinitely thin line, divide us into two camps, two races and ultimately, in two quite distinct realities. If we cannot grasp this, we cannot grasp the situation we are in, nor will we understand how to fix it. A universal theory cannot just try and explain one reality. There are lots of theories that address one of the realities, but such theories only tell half of the story. All theories of material reality are incomplete. We cannot have a universal theory that addresses only one half of the problem. We see a shadow of the problem in the division of our world into left and right halves. This is a distraction and a diversion. The left and right are opposite ends of a paradigm, but they are better though of as two halves of a half. They are not able to encapsulate one half each. Imagine a political theory that only dealt with the political left, or an economics theory that pretended socialism did not exist. Such theories would be incomprehensible and would tell us very little about how the world works. The politics and economics of this world are primarily about two distinct systems in conflict with one another. We notice that there is no way to resolve the differences. But there is a far more important observation to make. Neither side is able to win a conclusive victory. The more the right wins, the more self-destructive it becomes, and vice versa. Capitalism cannot exist without some elements of the left existing also. The political and economic left are not true alternatives, they are allies. They pose as combatants to divert attention from the real war. The left and right may fight over the same pool of resources, but both sides need the other. They are at the very root, allies against God. The battle is the spiritual fighting against the carnal flesh, both in its institutional and individualistic forms. The carnality of the flesh translates into a system full of conflicts and incompatibilities, even unto science which is dived not only into the hard and soft sciences, but numerous disciplines and subdisciplines. A universal science must not only reconcile all of these disparate studies but explain what fractured research into so many disciplines and sub-disciplines, in the first place. Truth is, when all is said and done, all one thing. Truth is coherent or it is a lie. The relativism of truth is an oxymoron at best, and an attack against sanity and the kingdom of God, at worst. Indeed, how can the world be physical if there is no single approach to the understanding of the corporal realm? But what are we dealing with, when we think of the physical reality? Nature is disembodied force or what is considered to be physical force, but this is a commonly accepted concept that is incomprehensible when investigated in detail. How can there be a force without sentience? There is no force other than the force of a sentient will. The solution for physicists was to provide nature with a wound-up watch. Nature is then able to wind down. But the point of transition where the infinitesimally small nothing translate into an infinitely powerful universe, is needless to say problematical and devoid of anything that might pass for reason. But it is easier to give nature energy than control it. Nature proved to be red in tooth and claw, which while acceptable for animals did not bode well for the continuance of humanity. The dual doctrine of power in which might makes right, and the end justifies the means, may serve the physicist and mechanical engineer well, but for history and politics it means constant war and crime. If power is intrinsic to matter, then what directs it? Why ought hydrogen atoms restructure themselves into a multiple of other atoms and these atoms combine in intricate ways to create macro-reality? Why is this ability to organize intrinsic to matter? Why must the entropic tendency of matter be channeled into complex structures? Why did the Big Bang not perform like all other Big Bangs and just dissipate energy evenly over the universe? How did this anomaly of the Big Bang produce time and space? It is not as if this was expected or even predicted. If anything, it runs counter to everything we know about chaotic events. In short, not only can we not establish a universal theory on the basis of a physical universe, everything we know about the physical universe makes anything but highly localized investigations impossible. Energy, as a concept, is nothing more than a term for observations of event chains the cause of which is unknown. We can trace event chains back to the Big Bang. We do not know why any of these events happened, though they all happened in a series back to and including the Big Bang, which logically speaking did not and could not have had a precipitating event. The boat may hit an iceberg and sink. But this is not necessarily so. It is the commonplace observation that boats that have their hull crushed in by icebergs sink. But this is an observation, not a causal necessity. If the boat did not sink, we could not say that it is breaking a law, other than one based on what is usually the case. But a hole in a hull is not the cause of a boat sinking. We do not know the cause, because what we are talking about here is something called correlation, not causation. This is because law, whether natural law or common law, is merely habit, routine or a regularly observable correlation. We stop at red lights and fall when unsupported. These are laws, but they merely denote a habitual correlation between the precipitating event and the subsequent event. But if we take some flint and make an arrowhead and another man comes along and destroys it, there is no equivocation. We created value and the other person destroyed that value. Our action stemming from our will, created something that had attached value. Another man, expressing his will, destroyed that thing of value. These are analytically real events. If we multiply these individuals and create two distinct groups, we end up with one group who adds value to the things of this world, and another group that exploits others and the weakness of this system to live parasitic lives. But people do not just do either of these things because of some natural law. Human will is involved, reason is involved. Even if we do not agree with the conclusions, we know that the root of the choice is embedded deep in the human psyche. Perhaps we have looked as hard as we might have at the prospect of a science of the will, or a universal science predicated on a reality that is information-based. That can be understood to some extent because there are two realities and mankind has, for different reasons, been hypnotized into thinking what he sees is real. What many call woke, is actually a case of mass, intergenerational hypnosis. What is the evidence for this? The major indicator is that reality is nothing more than an agreement. If everyone agrees that the elephant is in the room and can describe it vividly and coherent with all other observers, there is no way to prove the elephant does not exist. Indeed, the only a hypnotic state can be discerned is that it is incoherent in a very fundamental way. Consider the fact that we elect governments. We are led to believe this is what we want and need because the state was at minimum, a necessary evil. Yet the only need for the state is generated by the state. We might think we need to state, but we only need it if it exists. The state creates the need for the state, and generally the only thing it does, it generate a greater need for it and its services. There is no objective way the state's existence can be justified. That is the nature of a hypnotic state. It is a little world unto itself. This is why the world of the hypnotized is narrowed down to the hypnotist, the subject, and the world created by the suggestions of the hypnotist. But reality is simpler than the realms of the hypnotized would have us believe. Remember, reality is de facto, the result of the human will. It is the will of humans that has been compromised that makes the reality of the materialist seem real. Because it is not real, it is not self-sustaining. In the minds of carnal people, the world is running down, which it is because it is a fabrication. The true world is generated by the human will. It is generated from the value created by productive persons. There are two options. We can pay our way or not. The child is immature and so is a dependent. But the adult who is carnal is also immature in the spiritual sense. In the physical world, the researcher looks at force. This is the same as studying the carnal. But this force, this energy, cannot be quantified in any reasonable way in many environments. Because it does not exist, it is especially absent in the affairs of man. The carnal force, or energy, is found active in man, in only the most obtuse and tangential ways, as when our emotions take control of us. When we become animalistic, we become closer to nature. But the flow of natural energy cannot explain the creative energy of man. But it is this that we need to quantify and measure if we are to understand the human condition. But what is the human condition but one of a child seeking maturity and in so doing, seeking to enter a new reality, the reality of the spiritually mature adult? The natural world is not something in itself. It does not exist as an independent environment in which human ended up occupying. Physical reality is the reality of the child. The science of the natural world is the science of the spiritually immature. In the child's mind, reality is all about force. The child's reality is all about their own weakness and the power of the adult. The child often does not long to be an adult, so much as desire to have the power of the adult. This is manifested in superheroes and sometimes invisible friends who will have the power the child does not. A universal science is the reality of the spiritually mature. The universal experiment is test to determine if the reality of the child or the reality of the adult is the viable one. Without the dynamic of the child and adult, humanity has no purpose or mission. Indeed, the lure of perfection in the golden age is nothing more than a manifestation of the desire for adulthood. But there are two forms of adulthood, the carnal and the spiritual. The spiritual adult poses no burden on society and future generations. This state of adulthood is what the spiritual war is all about, and it is what is encapsulated by the universal theory, which is nothing more than the reality of the spiritually mature Christian. But what typifies or characterizes this reality? It is the reality of the spiritually mature superstition. Indeed, science is science because the reality of the spiritually mature is the manifestation of science. It is a reality lived as an experiment. We become scientific as we mature spiritually, but the science of the physical world is locked into the paradigm of the child, which is why it cannot produce a universal theory. The difference between the universal science and conventional science is the same as the difference between the child and the adult. The science of the immature adult is the science of force. The science of the spiritually mature is about creating value. Everything we do adds value or subtracts it. A theory is nothing more than an algorithm and tells us a way to create value. The common denominator in all sciences is the labor of a human being. Our theories and our best practices are all solutions to the problem of adding value to the world. What we need is a way to measure the value we add to the world through our businesses and sciences. This resolves down into an experiment in which the processes of the spiritually mature are tested against the materiality and corporality of the atheist's paradigm. The question is, what happens when the power of the human will is tested against the power of chance? However, to align these two paradigms into their respective arenas requires the Church, for it is in the Church that the spiritually mature become the test group and produce a quantified correlate of doing what is right. If the Church functions as a charity and becomes the owner of record of all that belongs to God, as per the Bible, then the congregation works for the Church in order to add value to it and build it up, also as per the Bible. All that is required to have a universal science and explanation for everything, is to measure the wealth that is created by the test group working for the Church and systematically not doing anything that would deprive the Church of potential value. Science consists in the quantified value created by the activity of Christians building the Church. The science they use adds value to the Church as does the technology. This is the only index we use. The physics and the mathematics, chemistry and so on, are modified and structured to add the most value to the Church. The same goes for our politics, economics, and theology. What we do and believe adds more value to what exists, than not. That is all that is important and all that is needed to have a universal science.